Hello, I'm Dr. Charlotte Crofts and I'm Associate Professor of Filmmaking at the University of the West of England. Thank you for watching my presentation. So today I'm going to be talking about Keep Calm and Carry Online, Cary Comes Home Festival and online film culture during the pandemic. So, Cary Comes Home Festival has been going since 2014. It's a biennial festival and its aims are to celebrate Cary Grant's Bristol roots, develop new audiences for his work and recreate the golden age of cinema going, which all is brilliant when we can do it in real life, but how does that work during a global pandemic when we're forced to move online? And that's what this paper is about. We did our first event at the Hippodrome, which is where Cary Grant started out. So we were tapping into our marketing about cinema going nostalgia and that sense of occasion of being on a red carpet. One of the things that we've done right from the beginning of the festival is also to encourage audience participation. So we invite people to dress up and we give them prizes for the best dressed man, woman, couple. And so these are some examples of people engaging with that with our Cary Grant stand, which you can see behind me as well. At the Hippodrome, we also had the local theatre group, the Big Act, to delineate Archie's story growing up in Bristol. And this is all part of an ethos of wanting to use Cary Grant's biography as a spur to creativity for people who live in Bristol today, and young people in particular. So as part of that, we also did a micro filmmaking challenge. Now, this is a photograph of Colleen Zwack. She's a Cary Grant superfan from Minnesota. When we showed Cary Grant's films at the Hippodrome, I remember standing on the red carpet. She was shaking with emotion with the power of being in a location where Cary Grant had been, because he is so important to her. So it was a very embodied feeling, a kind of frisson. For me, it was about being where Cary Grant had been, but also providing this structure in order for her to experience that. And I found that really powerful. So it was a very embodied moment which crystallized why I was doing the festival, which is about recognizing the importance of Cary Grant to Bristol, but also to people from outside of Bristol, and the relationship between the location and his wider global circularization as a star. In 2017, as part of the Being Human Festival, I set up the Looking for Archie walking tour, and it's about mapping Archie Leach and Cary Grant's footsteps around Bristol city centre, ending at the statue. So this is part of Bristol's wider placemaking memorialisation of Cary Grant. It's actually the 20th anniversary of the statue being erected this December. So this is very much what we do in real life. We're all together, we're wandering around Bristol, we're in enclosed spaces, all stuff that we couldn't do after the pandemic hit. All of the festivals have a gala, and the events often have wraparound content, including live music, cocktails, dressing up, which are designed to make it feel like an event. And so all of this physical activity, which does draw people internationally, we've had people from Australia and America, Europe, Ireland, all over the place, to make the pilgrimage to Bristol, to the birthplace of Cary Grant. And when I reflect on this critically in my writing, I situate it in relation to the 3 stages of pilgrimage, in which when we come together, and we can also talk about this in terms of festival studies, when we come together we experience a sense of communitas, sharing an experience with like-minded people. And I also examine this in the light of cinematic tourism and film-induced tourism, and this idea that people want to go and experience things in the places that they happened. So that's what we would normally do, but we had loads of plans for July of 2020 because it was the 100th year anniversary of when Archie Leach emigrated to New York with the Pender Troupe of Acrobats who he met at the Hippodrome. And so we had a one-day symposium that was planned at the Graduate Centre in Cooney. They just couldn't go ahead with it because New York closed down, but also they were fighting for their jobs. We were going to introduce The Awful Truth at Film Forum, which is an amazing cinema in Greenwich Village. That is closed, and I'm not sure whether it's reopening only just now, a year later. We were also planning to do an illustrated talk about Cary Grant in New York at Film at Lincoln Center, which is another key cultural institution for film in New York City. So none of these plans were possible. So I was like, what am I going to do? So I thought, I have to do something to mark this centenary. It's really important to me. And there are a number of things that I had planned and things that I would have planned which couldn't take place in person. So I was like, how can I celebrate? How can I mark this occasion? So we ended up doing 3 events, 2 of which I'm going to outline a little bit more here. One was the keynote speaker with James Narramore, who wrote a seminal piece on Cary Grant's performance in North by Northwest. He was to be the keynote at the symposium, and he very kindly did his keynote, the title of his talk, which was Some Versions of Cary Grant, which you can find on our website at carycomeshome.co.uk. But I did 2 talks. One was called Sailing with Cary Grant, where I set off from Southampton, which is where this conference is actually hosted, because Cary Grant, or Archie Leach as he was then, sailed away on the RMS Olympic. This is a picture of it docked at Southampton. We have his passenger record on the 21st of July. It took a week exactly to sail. We see Archibald Leach on the passenger record and port of departure, Southampton. And so for this talk, I wanted to symbolise captaining his ship across America, and this talk was very much about the actual journey. So we got a real sense of what it would have been like for this 16-year-old boy to go on this transatlantic journey to America, and the excitement he must have felt when he arrived in New York. And that was the second talk. And just to show that had this event taken place in Southampton potentially, which is one of the things that we were looking into, we perhaps may not have got such a global reach. So mainly in the UK and Ireland, some on the east coast of America and dotted around the States, and a couple in Europe for this, but much wider geographical reach than potentially would have actually physically come to the festival. As part of that, I reflected on the fact that Cary Grant played lots of characters that were seafaring on screen, and how this signifies in the global flow of his star image. You know, particularly An Affair to Remember, which ended up being an important film when we came to the November Festival. So there was audience engagement. So these guys had clocked me wearing the hat in the first talk, and then they came to the second talk, which is a week later on the day he arrived, the 28th, with their baggage and their captain caps, and interacting, you know, spontaneously. We weren't necessarily inviting them to do this, but they did it spontaneously. These guys got up at 5 a.m. He arrived at Pier 59 at dawn on the 28th of July, and we would have been meeting people on the pier. And this brings me to one of the points, you know, relating to the theme of the time and the body. You know, when you are inviting people from across the globe to attend, there's all sorts of things you need to think about in terms of time zones, when people are awake, when best to programme stuff, or you have to rely on people being such super fans that they'll get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. So the second talk that I did was called Greeting Cary Grant. It was a virtual tour. This is what the New York skyline would have looked like in 1920 when he arrived. The Empire State Building hadn't been built, the Woolworth Tower was there. And I'm just going to show you a brief video of my talk. I used Google Earth and Google Maps.
If you actually ever do manage to go to New York, if it's ever safe to do so again, then you can access this by an entrance over here and you walk around. So I just think that's very exciting. You can see, so we are here. It's called the Maxim Marina. And this is what the Chelsea Piers would have looked like at the time that Cary Grant arrived. Okay, so I'd just like to take this moment just to welcome Archie 100 years ago today. Welcome Archie Leach to New York, stepping foot on American soil for the first time and beginning a very incredible journey. So let's just take a little pause to welcome him and to mark the occasion. Roughly at this time, 100 years ago, Archie Leach arriving in America.
Okay, this is a tweet from somebody who's at the event, because we also went and explored all the theatres that he would have worked in when he was on vaudeville. He lived in New York and toured America with vaudeville for over 10 years before he made his way out west to Hollywood. There's a function in Google Street View when you can actually go inside the theatre and explore what it would have looked like. We went inside a couple of theatres. So what I was trying to do was, because I'd used all these tools when I was recceing New York, planning what we were going to do, and we had planned to meet him on the docks. I don't think we would have done a detailed tour of the theatre district because they're so dispersed. So in some ways, the technology allowed us to do more than we might have done if we'd been there in person. And this event had slightly wider reach. We had people in Hong Kong and Australia, and in Central America, and potentially Bermuda. I'm not quite sure where that dot is. My geography fails me. So here's some feedback from audience evaluation. A thoroughly enjoyable programme of events. Technical hitches were a bit stressful to watch, as you could see from the demo I just showed you, but we're all struggling with this. Great credit is due to the organisers who've come up with this imaginative virtual programme to replace planned activities. Thank you for your hard work. I'm now looking forward to future events. And then thanks for a fascinating lecture, Charlotte. Really ambitious virtual tour. So using those tools opened up an understanding of Cary Grant's time in New York, possibly in ways that we might not have done so successfully if we'd just been there in person. Okay, so that is making me move on to the 2020 festival. It was due to take place the 20th to 21st of November. I made a decision quite early on that it was going to be online. I didn't want to risk the expense of hiring venues and having to cancel, and in the event that was the right decision. One of the things that is an issue for vintage film festivals is that you can't get distribution rights to stream the films from the distributors. It's only kind of more recent films or smaller distribution companies that are allowing films to be streamed. So we couldn't stream films, and that had an advantage and a disadvantage. The disadvantage was that we had to rely on people's goodwill to source the films themselves, and we gave them an idea of where to find them. And on some occasions they had to pay for them themselves. And the advantage is that we didn't have to pay for film hire because we were not showing the film. People were either sourcing them for free because they already had Amazon Prime membership or Netflix membership, or some of them are out of copyright and circulating. And so this idea of the watch-along sort of grew out of a number of things that I'd taken part in during the first lockdown, where people were encouraging you to watch along and discuss films. Being part of Friday Film Club was incredibly important to me during lockdown, and it made me have that feeling of communitas. I felt like I was watching it with other people and I could see what they were saying and I could join in with that conversation later, and it kind of, the conversation would carry on. People who'd been involved with Friday Film Club could write to Carol Morley, who set it up, and ask for a badge, and she distributed these badges. And it was really, really moving. It was a way to be co-present but not in the same space. It was a way to share a love of cinema. It was a way to learn about films that perhaps I wouldn't normally watch, and I watched them because other people were watching them, and they were being kind of curated, and it was really powerful. And so this is what we were tapping into. Another thing that happened at the beginning of lockdown, Cary Grant started trending for no reason at all. My supposition is that we all gravitated towards comfort viewing. We gravitated towards nostalgia. We gravitated towards stuff that made us feel good. And Cary Grant was up there as one of the two top sort of trending actors on Twitter at the beginning of the lockdown. And so I wanted to tap into film Twitter. I wanted to tap into people who I followed and who followed the Cary Grant Festival. And so I invited various people to contribute in different ways. So this is Aurora Bergoglio. She is Citizen Screen on Twitter, and I noticed that she wrote very convincingly about how Penny Serenade was a very underrated film, and I wanted her to introduce the watch-along to add value to the, you know, we can't just go and watch a film on our own and just know that other people are watching at the same time. It has to have a sense of community. So what we did, we gave people instructions, we would do an introduction, and then we would all dramatically count down from 10 and all press play at the same time. And I would let the beginning of the title music play before I stopped sharing. And so Film Twitter was really instrumental in developing our audience. And we used Crowdcast, so it's not a streaming platform. It's a kind of a broadcasting platform for people to do watch-alongs, but also to do talks. Bristol Festival of Ideas use it, and that's who introduced me to the idea of using it. So it's not Shift 72 and it's not Eventive, which the big festivals are using, where they are streaming content and it's geo-blocked. We couldn't get the distribution rights, so we had to do watch-alongs. The reason I gravitated towards it was because it enabled me to do a pay what you feel, because I wanted events to be free for those people who'd been affected by COVID, but I wanted people to be able to support the festival if they could afford to. And actually the festival, people were very generous and donated if they could. The other reason that I wanted to do it on this platform was that it stayed on the platform and people could watch it again later if they wanted to. And also that the comments are open even before the event starts, so that you can, once you've signed up to the event, you can comment and start to build that sense of community. I also wanted to programme some weepies because, first of all, I think they're, really neglected, critically neglected form, but also because I noticed from Film Twitter that lots of people were asking for recommendations for films that would make them cry. There was a sense that people needed to cry during lockdown, or needed an emotional outlet to release all the pent-up anxiety and emotion associated, particularly with the first lockdown. I think now we might just be inured to it. And this is an example of kind of a bit of cinephilia happening around the film, a really close analysis of this particular scene and the performances in it. And that really provided a sense of communitas, that I was potentially introducing people to this film who know Cary Grant, but it's a lesser known work. But also there were people who were familiar and were revelling in watching it again. The key gala film, had we been in person and had a big gala with live music and cocktails and the best dress competition, would have been An Affair to Remember. It's tapping into the general theme of the festival, which is about continuing the theme of journeys that we had in the July event. Pam Hutchinson, who is a film critic and historian, introduced it, and I commissioned her to make a cocktail, and she made a Hitch cocktail, which is a Gibson from North by Northwest, and that generated interest in the festival because all the screenings had associated drinks that you might want to make at home. And we also, for the gala in particular, had inspirations of what you might want to wear, and encouraging people to dress up. I dressed up as Janu, and Pam dressed up as Terry with her green scarf. This is us on Crowdcast introducing the event. And these are members of the public who are dressing up and getting into the spirit. DVD at the ready, Gibson in hand. And this is a couple who got very, very involved in all aspects of the festival. I've listened to 2 educational talks and am now enjoying the gala event, a watch party with pink champagne, which is obviously featured in the film. And this is just somebody saying, can I just say I'm loving the amount of love for Cary in his films going around today. Cary stays home, Cary approves. As part of building on An Affair to Remember, I wanted to do a marathon of all the remakes of Love Affair, because An Affair to Remember is a remake of Love Affair, both directed by Leah McCarey. There's a 1994 version by Warren Beatty, and we showed a Bollywood version called Man, and we also showed Sleepless in Seattle, which features the theme of meeting on the Empire State Building, but also features people watching An Affair to Remember. But I wanted to do this in a way which didn't gloss over the problematic representation of disability, and I invited a film programmer and disabled rights activist to do the marathon with me, and we had a kind of a cool down after the marathon. And it was really interesting that audiences were picking up on the similarities but also cultural differences between the two. So on the left we have An Affair to Remember, on the right we have Man, and they're pointing at the Gateway of India as the place where they will meet in 6 months' time. Here's somebody getting ready to watch Sleepless in Seattle in their pyjamas. I actually introduced it in my dressing gown after a very long day of watching films. And these guys, it was 11 p.m, it was a late night for us in Bristol, and they were in Canada at 6 p.m. And so the challenge of working across time zones, but also being together across time zones, that really excited me. Some people had issues sourcing their films, their platforms gave up the ghost and they couldn't watch. So this person was ready with their cocoa and their pyjamas, but their Amazon Prime let them down. This is Ross Wilcock, who joined me on the cool down, and we unpacked some of the cultural differences, and there's a whole video of that which you can watch on the website. It was a really interesting discussion. I also reached out to the videographic film criticism world and invited people to submit films on the theme of the journeys of Cary Grant, and this was in collaboration with the Video Essay Podcast. We did a roundtable discussion of most of the contributors, and you can also see that on our website. So it's kind of reaching out to different levels of film fandom and cinephilia. And then the whole thing ended with a film quiz. And here is my colleague Freya Billington, but she came with her parents and she was just hoping they would figure out how to join the Zoom. Audience feedback was that it made people feel online community. So some people had been to the festival already in real life, and so they were meeting with people they'd met before at the festival. The festival also reported feeling welcoming and inclusive. I felt a member of Cary's community, even though I was attending for the first time. Felt that Charlotte created a positive and inclusive atmosphere, which encouraged me to attend in person in 2022, fingers crossed. So this is the guys that we saw earlier. They're being team sensitive to questions, which is a quote from North by Northwest. That's their team name. So the shift to online was appreciated by participants. Great credit is due to the organisers to have come up with this imaginative virtual programme to replace planned activity. Online events provided welcome cheer during a difficult lockdown year and a perfect bit of escapism that was very welcome given the current circumstances. And this is me tweeting on the left at the end of the festival with my pink champagne cocktail and some of our Instagram social. And you can see the two hosts of the quiz there. So the online events attracted new audiences. 53% of people who came to the November 22 festival were attending for the first time, and 36% of the remaining 47 had attended events in July, and several attendees had attended previous Cary Come Home events going back until 2014, with 24% having attended the 2018 festival. So our audience has grown gradually over time. Online has potentially increased the reach of the festival. And that really excites me, because even as I was encouraging people to fly to New York to celebrate the centenary, I was already feeling slightly uneasy about the carbon footprint. And there's quite a lot of research about the environmental impact of cinematic tourism. You know, it has pros and cons because it can stimulate an economy and it can bring lots of good to a region or an area. And I know Destination Bristol are very keen to exploit Cary Grant's connection to Bristol to encourage people to come to Bristol. But there's something to be said for how many people were able to get involved and not have to spend air miles in doing so. So while some participants had planned to join us in New York and or Bristol, I would have attended in Bristol, but not if there were COVID restrictions. Holding the events online made them more accessible to a wider audience. I would not have been able to attend physical events in New York City, regardless of COVID-19. As online events, it meant I could get involved. So accessibility, both geographically, but also potentially people who may not be so mobile in terms of being able to travel and those kinds of things. I think that's another aspect. It's a positive outcome. I'd not travelled to Bristol for events, but as a fan was pleased to be able to join online. Hope that will be available in future. Another participant reported, the pandemic changed your plans, but it also allowed me to participate when I would not have been able to otherwise. So there's definite advantages in terms of access. The other advantage is that there's the long tail, that people can still revisit the events in future. That is actually Cary Grant on the right playing the Mock Turtle in the 1933 version of Alice in Wonderland. Okay, so I've kind of whizzed through that really, really quickly, and I'm just at the beginning of kind of critically reflecting on the festival, whilst also planning future events. And I will write this up into a publication. But for the moment, I would really like you to save the date for this year. This is a fallow year because it's a biennial festival. The next festival is 2022. But the 7th of December is the 20th anniversary of when this statue, which it looks like Bob Monkhouse, I have to admit. But anyway, the 20th anniversary of when the statue was erected and the 90th anniversary of him changing his name to Cary Grant. And also Bristol celebrating the centenary of William Friese-Green's death. So we're having a big push for Bristol Film 2021 this year, and I'm going to do something possibly online, possibly in person, possibly both on the 7th of December to mark that particular occasion. But the next festival is the 18th to the 20th, 2022, so save the date. I suspect that I would like to explore this being a hybrid event. I do think that the online reach is something that I don't want to let go of, and it's given me I don't know, if I think about it as an embodied thing, I feel like I've got tentacles reaching across the globe in a way that the in-person event doesn't have. And the next festival's theme will be class, because Cary Grant came from a working class background, and yet he's known as being somebody who represents the kind of the highest class. But in several of his films, he did play working class characters. So I want to explore class more generally in the festival. So if anyone's interested in getting involved with that, do let me know. And I hope you've enjoyed that, and I look forward to seeing you at the live event where we can chat about this further.